It's my dog. She's 12. Okay. I will call to order this Thursday, August 8th, 2024 meeting of the Moab City Planning Commission at 6:05 p.m. First item of, in attendance tonight, we have 3 of our planning commissioners, myself, Kai Marienfeld, Jill Tatton, and Miles Lofton, as well as city planner Corey Shirtleff, and then we have some folks from the sustainability department here in the audience, as well as another audience member and our city council liaison, Luke Wojciechowski. First item of business is citizens to be heard. If you are here to speak, now would be the time. I don't know if you are here to say anything. Audience member? Okay, I will take that as a no. All right. Let's see. Next on our agenda, we have approval of minutes from our July 25th regular meeting. They are there as usual in the agenda linked. If there's any changes or corrections we need to make, now would be the time. Otherwise, we can entertain a motion to approve those.
I'll go ahead and motion to approve the minutes from the July 25th, 2024 meeting.
All right.
I'll go ahead and second that.
Okay, a motion from Miles and a second from Jill. Any further discussion? Okay, all in favor, say aye. Aye. All right, minutes approved. All 3 commissioners in attendance saying yay. Next item tonight is an action item 4.1, consideration and possible approval of attestation for the RCOG funded downtown dispersed parking project letter of support. This is a briefing and a possible action, it looks like, from Richard Laurie.
Yep.
And sincere apologies to y'all that we didn't at all see that last week. When
no, it was totally my fault. So
in need and a lot.
I was going to get into the background.
Oh, sorry. Miles saw it. I didn't.
Recording in progress.
Yes, you do not need to apologize. It was my fault. So the purpose of this is the Governor's Office of Economic Opportunity has a Rural Community Opportunity Grant. And a big part of that is to have the involvement of the Planning Commission. And it is simply something that I kind of overlooked in the progress report, because it's not, I don't usually go to the Planning Commission or to the City Council progress reports. So I overlooked it and kind of got to you guys a little bit late, but I got an extension. And so here we are. The purpose of this is the last time I was in front of you all in February, I believe, Jill was not here. Carolyn and Mikkel were here, Miles and Kaya, and you guys approved a letter of support to supplement for an RCOG grant to supplement the downtown dispersed parking project, really to help fund some of the amenities that will be going in. We subsequently were awarded that, pretty much the max amount you can get for an RCOG, got about $600K. And since then, the project is well underway. We're at the point to do an annual progress report. I need to share my screen. Just how to do this. And I just wanted to get a letter of attestation, basically saying that you all have confirmed that my progress report is accurate, that everything looks good. And I provided a pay app number 5. One of the reasons I was so late to getting this is because I just wanted the most up-to-date possible pay app for my progress report. And pay app number 5, pay application number 5 was got that like a couple weeks ago. And so in my progress report, have you all like reviewed that, or I can go through it as well?
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind giving just a brief presentation just for folks who might be watching this on YouTube and just for the record too, that'd be awesome.
Yep. So let's see. share screen button is in the way. All right, so we got an award of $590,319 to supplement the downtown dispersed parking project. The dispersed parking project is roughly about 38% through the current contract price. We get that by going to the construction pay app. We have the current contract price and 5.7 million. Total completed improved to date, 2.2 million. I divided those and we get the 38% of just total contract completion. Just a quick note for me looking at this, 5.7 million is lower than the original contract price because they had some change orders to help reduce the costs. It's progressing well. We've had a few streets with major infrastructural components completed, utilities, utility lines, fire extinguishers, electrical conduits, things like that, pedestrian bulb outs and rearranged parking spaces. And all of those are great, but they're not too relevant to the art. That's showing that the project itself is moving along, but the RCOG funded amenities are only about 6% through, $36,000 out of that 590K. We go back to the pay app. I've highlighted in yellow, a little hard to see. We have bollard luminaires. This is part of the 36,000 we paid for. We have not installed them yet, but this column is for materials presently stored. So we have purchased them. They're just sitting aside, waiting for further progress. And we have installed 16 stone benches. Everything highlighted is RCOG funded, by the way. We have had 16 stone benches installed. That's about half. And the remaining blue highlighted items will be coming in the future. So again, we are only about 6% through the RCOG funded part. Everything is on course to be done by October 2024 this year. Companies that have utilized this grant money, the city of Moab has passed it on through to, has used it to pay for services provided by LeGrand Johnson Construction Company. That's just where those $36,000 went to. Again, half of the stone benches and the storage of illuminated bollards. Grant funds have gone to nothing else. Future use of the funds, again, 36,000 currently spent on those items. And then in the future, the remaining 553,000 of our RCOG grant funds will be going to the rest of the installation of bollards, the remaining stone benches, and then the other items that were highlighted in blue in the pay app, the water fountains, other types of bench varieties. Right now, the only ones that are in there, you will notice that there are flat top stones that are about 20 inches high. Those are the stone benches for people to rest on. In the future, they will be like actual like metal benches, I think. And I think they have a unique design to them. Bike racks, pergolas are, I think, pretty close to going in. Those are shade structures, artwork bases, and some vegetation. I think when I showed you, this isn't too important, but I think the pergolas, maybe they have found a new location from the last time, from when I wrote this grant, to be in more, just better spots. But pergolas and vegetation will be great. A lot of trees to help shade things and keep things cool, and a lot of forbs and whatnot to just reduce that heat island effect and make things look nice.
Yeah, I saw that's what, 51 trees provided for in the expense sheet. That's awesome.
That's 51 trees, 1,200 1-gallon plantings, 500 5-gallon plantings, 5-gallon plantings. These are like, how big is that bulb sack? I think is what it is.
Having shaded parking like anywhere is going to be awesome.
Yes, shade parking would be great. The pergolas are more for the bulb outs and the pedestrian infrastructure and the benches. I think, I don't know, maybe some solar panel covered parking in the future would be cool, but that's just the wish list for me. Pergolas, 5 of them will be coming in, 2 watering stations. I forget where one of them is, but the other one is just right next to the food court. So that would be great.
Oh, awesome.
And then artwork bases, think one of them is being relocated and then adding a new one. These are what the Moab Arts puts the sculptures onto. Again, the archive funded amenities are generally the last items to be installed. And so that's again, while we're only about 6% through them. Completion date, October 2024, hesitantly. As far as where funds have come from, again, from the beginning, I said that 2.2 million of the current contract total has been spent. 36K about for RCOG. UDOT hotspots is where a major part of this funding also comes from. It was the real major impetus for this project. They have reimbursed 850K, and we have about 3.3 million remaining in the pot to reimburse in the future. So as of right now, if you subtract all of that from the 2.2, the city of Moab has a current amount paid of 1.3 million. And then the last part of, so I took these out of, these are the only actual questions in the progress report. This isn't the actual progress report. I'll be copy pasting these into the portal itself. But the last one is about the effectiveness of the awarded grants and how it's improved economic development. Again, this is the Governor's Office of Economic Opportunity Grants. So they really care about economic development. And the real sell for us was just increasing the safety and appeal of downtown for pedestrians to walk around. And then in addition, the project as a whole is adding parking spots. Our COG funded amenities, the economic development benefit has not yet been fully realized or majorly realized, just because again, those items come in later. But if you want to look at the project as a whole, I would say that the bulb outs and have reduced the distance to walk across some of the streets that are completed with them. And there's now mid-block refuges that are usable, and the handicap spots actually are right next to them. So the handicap parking spots, you can take your wheelchair to the middle of the crosswalk. And then, so you, again, reducing the distance. And yeah, so it's just increasing walkability and accessibility in the downtown area and increasing parking spots. So that's about it. Again, the main focus of the progress report is where our COG funding hasn't gone too far yet, but the project as a whole is, we're just going by dollar amounts, about 40% done.
Cool.
And
Yeah, of
then,
course, the archive stuff seems to be mostly amenities, and all the infrastructure has to go in first before any of that can be installed. So
yeah,
it's not
exactly.
surprising that we're 6%.
Yeah, like landscaping is surely going to be the very last thing, I'm sure. The illuminated bollards and pergolas and watering stations will go in hopefully relatively soon. So yeah, so if you all agree with my just summation, then I have just a letter of attestation that I will have Kaya sign as the commission chair. Any questions or
Any
anything like that on the
questions? from you?
project?
I mean, it's great. I think any opportunity we can take to offset things with grant funding, especially when it's sort of like the cherry on top of a lot of these projects, you know, this wouldn't necessarily be something that we would be spending city money on, at least not to that degree, you know, kind of the things that take it from a useful functional project to like a nice feels good project. And
Yeah.
so it's nice to see again that you guys have gone out for funding from other sources for that aspect of things. I think that's really great. And having shade, having trees, having places for folks to sit is going to be really nice. So I'm excited.
Mhm.
Yeah, right now I like the way it is working right now, but once all the plants and stuff come in, it's really gonna change the vibe of everything. And the city's has been beefing up its landscaping maintenance crew, I believe. I think we got one more person on that
That's great.
side of things.
I know that's a community concern, is that like more medians and more vegetation means more neglected vegetation, which is an understandable concern from people in the community because it definitely has been that way
Mhm.
sometimes. So that's really good to hear too, and just things that are self substantiated a little bit more, you know.
On that as well, just while we're here, Alexi and we got a forestry grant as well, and there'd be a couple employees getting arborist training or whatever it was called.
Awesome.
Trained arborists. So
Be able to properly maintain
yeah.
everything we're installing.
I don't know if you guys have looked at it, but the tree stewardship ordinance are the part of our code that deals with trees. It talks about how we need to have an urban forester, whatever the title is, to actually,
Yeah,
administer that code.
absolutely.
But we don't have anything like that.
Definitely. So you don't want safety hazards to come from the trees that we all,
So we should have more expertise coming as well.
that's really cool.
Yeah, I guess everything looks good. Then if I could get a vote, have Kaya sign this very short letter.
We'll take it back from you now, if you don't mind.
Oh, sorry.
So thank you, Richard, and thank you everybody for putting that together. Again, apologies for our sort of unresponsiveness, generally not Miles last week. Jill too, you guys both chimed in.
Got lucky.
I was away. So there is there's a recommended motion, of course, in our agenda summary as per usual. We can entertain that. We can also continue or table it if we have any other information we might need. And then we could also not approve it. So those are our options this evening.
I mean, the presentation was pretty thorough and
Mhm.
I'm very much in agreement that things are moving along. And
Yeah.
so that sounds pretty appropriate.
Do you wanna?
I'll go ahead. I move that the City of Moab Planning Commission approve the 2024 ARCOG Progress Report Letter of Attestation to be signed by the Planning Commission Chair.
Okay, we have a motion recommending that signature by Miles. Do we have a second?
I will second that.
And a second from Jill. This is easy today. Just look at you two the whole time. Okay, any further discussion? Okay, we'll just do a simple voice vote. All in favor of the motion on the table?
Aye.
All right, motion passes 3-0. Thank you, Richard.
Thanks, Richard.
Appreciate it.
I will actually probably just go print out a hard copy.
Go print out a hard copy and I'll do it. Ask Corey. They have trouble tracking me down sometimes, so better now. Okay. Next on our agenda, we have a discussion item tonight, which is draft framing for the Moab EV readiness ordinance. This is a briefing and discussion, no action item on this evening. And here we have Lexi. Take it away. Hey. Pull up so I can share my screen. Yeah. Okay. There it is. So this evening I wanted to get some feedback on EV readiness ordinance. The market for EVs is growing. I hear more about it via email from people who are looking for charging and having trouble. And EVs also help the city with its sustainability goals. So when Utah Clean City or Clean Energy contacted me and asked if I was interested in this, I kind of started asking people around the planning office and checking to see if it might be something we're interested in. And then I told them that we would like to get some guidance on that, have their help. So transportation is a big chunk of our greenhouse gases, about 29%. And we have goals to cut those and also go towards renewable electricity, which means that if we switch to electric vehicles, or maybe facilitate people making that switch if they want to, and we also are moving to renewable electricity, then we're cutting emissions a lot. And EVs also don't have tailpipe emissions, which is helpful for air quality. Currently, we have pretty low adoption, although that's it's increasing across the country at this point. And not just in Utah, but a lot of the states adjacent to us who might be people who are also traveling through here who would be interested in having these vehicles. And by having infrastructure ready for EV charging, it makes it easier for people to be able to do that if they want to. Because although it's
coming, I feel like for a lot of people, it's still a barrier, looking at whether or not there might be EV charging at their home or the places they're going. As that becomes more available, it makes it easier to drive an electric vehicle. Okay, so first I wanted to go through a few terms and things so we can get to discussing the language. When I talk about EVs, I'm primarily talking about battery electric vehicles or plug-in hybrids. Both of them have batteries that can take external sources of electricity, like plugging it into a charger or a wall. They also can cut emissions by a third or more, or half or more. So they would help a lot with our greenhouse gas goals and also would benefit from having EV readiness. So the second thing is EV charging. There are different levels of preparation. EV capable is basically having everything ready. So if you want to run wire and then eventually put an outlet and a charger in, you could. It helps a lot, mainly because conduit and getting conduit into a parking lot is an expensive retrofit because you might have to go trench. Having a transformer that's the right size prevents you from having to replace that later. So EV capable is just putting things in place. So if you ever decide, you could. EV ready goes a step beyond that, and it basically gets an outlet ready. You could essentially plug and play if you ever decided you wanted an EV installed. So EVSE installed is pretty self-explanatory. That's when you actually have a charger attached. But there are levels of readiness all the way up to EV installed. So for locations that are thinking, for example, a multi-family housing unit who doesn't have anyone currently living there who needs an EV charger, but thinks they might in next year or 5 years, they could be at some other level of readiness and not necessarily have an EV charger already installed that's already becoming obsolete before anybody wants to use it. So from EV installed, we have different levels of charging. Level 1 is basically a very slow charge from a regular outlet. And level 2 amps it up and cuts the charge time significantly. This is the most common level of charging to see in places where people are going to dwell for a little while, or even a lot of people will put this in their house if they're going to charge overnight. And then level 3 amps it up even more, and it can get your charge down to half an hour or less. This is what we have in Lions Park right now. So these are the fast charges that people might get if they're trying to take a trip and charge, eat, and move. It's a little less common, I would say, for day-to-day charging. People probably tend to go to more level 2 there. People try to keep their battery somewhere in a middle range because it's best for the battery. So I would say level 3 charging is a little less common for day-to-day use. So the reason why we're talking about it, we got to earlier, it reduces charging as a barrier to driving an EV. It gives people choices about what kind of vehicle they want to buy. It can also help a lot with people who are living in multifamily things, so they're not running an extension cord out of a door to try to get a charge on their vehicle. And it also avoids the cost of retrofits. And it can save a lot of money. This is 2016 from Oakland, so the actual numbers are probably not accurate for Moab in 2024, but it gets some to the scale of a retrofit in terms of the cost that it would take to possibly upgrade electrical or trench or do other things that would be necessary. So it saves a lot of money to install EV capable or more, like higher levels of readiness from the very beginning. And that's where we get to the part that I would like your guidance. More than 80 communities have done some sort of tailoring of EV readiness ordinances in the Southwest. What I'm showing you here are a proposed code for 2024. Utah is not currently using this. In fact, it's not, it's a proposed code. Currently, we're at, I believe, 2021. And we have some amendments to that for residential in particular. So that would be possibly what is coming, although it's unlikely that Utah would be adopting that immediately, even if it did come through as a recommendation in the IECC code. And then Salt Lake City is sort of at a baseline. Around 20% is recommended as a baseline. So they have that just for multifamily, so people would be able to charge at home. And then this is what Utah Clean Energy recommended for us. So that's our starting point for a discussion, but part of the reason I want to discuss it with you is to decide what makes sense for Moab. So a few of the things I wanted to ask you are, where does EV infrastructure make sense in Moab? Where we do think it's needed, what level of readiness do we want going from capable to installed? And who should be installing it? Should it be only from the very beginning if they're building something new, or is it something that should also go in major renovations of some sort? Okay, I am open to your ideas or questions.
Thank you for the presentation. Any thoughts from anybody?
So, I mean, at least in like my immediate thoughts are, I would have a hard time wanting to require it as something that would be necessary in almost any form of residential. Like, I see like wanting to upgrade that in your own home or something like that as a choice. If you want to drive a vehicle like that, then, having that kind of, infrastructure in your home is nice, especially to go from the 120 to an actual charger. Understandable. And I know plenty of people install those in their garages or whatever so that they can charge their cars overnight. I have a hard time saying, like, if somebody wanted to build a carport and they did not own an EV vehicle and were not planning on owning one, I have a hard time saying, like, oh yeah, but you're going to have to get to this level of EV readiness. I just don't think EVs are quite that ubiquitous. And it's not something I would really want to require on a residential level, with maybe the small exception of like during development. If we have a level 2 site plan or something large coming to us that's like an apartment building or otherwise, then I could see having that initial preparedness so that I don't remember the terminology for it, but essentially the EV ready, where at the point that somebody would want one of those installed or otherwise, that the infrastructure would already be there, the conduit would already be under the pavement, stuff like that. Because it is true that like tearing up a parking lot to run new conduit and changing out, electrical hardware that is all rated to a certain voltage, and EV chargers take a significant amount of current. So, all that infrastructure could be in place for bigger developments or things like that. But from like a small perspective, when somebody pulls a building permit for a small thing in their home or otherwise, a remodel, I just can't imagine having them put in EV infrastructure if they don't own an EV or want an EV at the time.
Yeah, I'll be honest, that's where I am too. I think this makes a ton of sense. Obviously, we all know that doing something from the get-go is a lot easier than retrofitting. That makes total sense for so many things. But I think we're really at the point where I know a lot of people with electric vehicles, they made the decision to buy the electric vehicle and they made a decision to have an electrician come and put that in for them in their garage or their side of their house or wherever. Most of the hotels that have been built in the last 5 years also have EV chargers, or a lot of them seem to, that they've put in as a component to attract clients who have EV vehicles. And I think that's appropriate. We got the grant from Rocky Mountain Power. Rocky Mountain Power paid for the fast charging station, which is awesome, up at Lions Park. But I think for me, as far as where the priority is, both on just infrastructure costs, what we would like to make our community friendly to, and kind of where the market is right now, I don't know that it rises to that level for me. And also just, where I can see this is in new construction, in permitting. If we got to a point where there were kind of like with the landscape ordinance, where it's like a pick and choose, you gotta kind of combine things to make the whole that we're looking for, but you can figure out what kind of works best for you. I could see there being some sort of sustainability component of new construction where you have a list of 10 options. And as a person going in for a new build permit, you pick 3 that you're implementing, whether that's low flow toilets, whether that's EV charger or charging readiness, or zero escaping. I mean, something like that. I feel like that would be a thing that would work maybe better for Moab, because it gives people options and it gives them the choice, and it's essentially more of an incentive and less of a mandate for things. Obviously, that's not what you're proposing here or proposing anything. It's just a discussion, but I don't know that we're here yet is my gut check on it. And obviously we are an advisory body and it's up to city council. So I'd be curious what they think about that, but yeah. But I mean, this totally makes sense. I feel like, you know, the educational component of it is huge, obviously with the building department and with everything with planning, we're like, man, everybody who's interested in a new build should sure have this information to be like, look, this is going to be this now, and you just run another conduit under the pavement, or 6 years from now, who knows what's going to happen, and it could really be a lot more expensive. I think, there's certainly things that particularly in larger developments that are happening that people want to get ahead of because they know the cost of putting it in for an apartment complex or putting it in for a new subdivision, stuff like that. So
I also think plenty of developers and home builders are aware that like running a 40-volt 240 to the garage can be useful for many reasons.
yeah.
beyond-
Yep. Bring out your welder.
Yeah.
So it would make a lot of sense to me building a new home to set something like that up. And yes, that could be used for an EV. It could be used for your hobby welder. It could, whatever it happens to be.
Blow your wrap up really fast.
Yeah, blow your wrap up really fast. Plug your RV in, essentially I see that in and of itself being an incentive to have that first level of readiness without having to require it, especially in terms of like, I could see this being something for a level 1 or level 2 site plan, but not being something for a building permit, just because we all know the cost of retrofit is expensive. And so if you're requiring it for a building permit application and you're already, you already have an expense with your landscaping ordinance compliance and your, everything else that you need to get that permit. This just feels a little too far away to contribute that.
Mhm.
And for the purposes of discussion as well, I think it would be really important from a city perspective, if we continue to put these in on our public space, that we tie it somehow with renewable energy that's generated within the city.
Mhm.
Like you mentioned, parking spaces covered with solar panels, so you have shaded parking and otherwise. Because the reality is, currently, as much as we try, EVs still use power that is in large part not generated in a sustainable way. And so while it reduces the tailpipe emissions that we all breathe as we walk around Main Street, it's still not a truly sustainable solution. And so the more we can do to kind of, if we're building code around EVs, to tie some amount of like, if the city's going to install EV chargers, that the city will also install solar panels to offset how much of those EV chargers are drawing off the grid. I think building that in early so that when we go to do this in, however many 5-10 years when EVs are more popular, or who knows, would be a good starting place. Because as it stands, they're an interesting study in what we can do with batteries and how functional we can make these things. But currently we are still drawn off the grid for most of them. And if we're really talking about sustainability, I'd like to kind of address that with some amazing things like, how good our photovoltaic panels have gotten nowadays and how much we can do to offset that.
And we are a member of the Utah Renewable Communities, so we will be 100% renewable electricity by 2030. So not now, but it's coming. And we do have solar panels on 5 of the city buildings so far. So we're not there yet, but we are heading the right direction. Yeah, so that makes sense in terms of getting them even cleaner for electricity. And I'm hearing not for anything that's like a renovation or a building permit, maybe. Level 1 and 2, maybe, or maybe in the future. Like plans, level 1 and level 2 plans.
I would love if we could maybe start with some sort of incentive program. Like if this is a priority of the city is EV readiness and trying to incentivize property owners, homeowners, business owners, whomever to take this option. Something, and I think a lot are already incentivized. I think you know, a lot of the hotels that have EV chargers want to attract a clientele that has a Tesla, you know, and that's why they put them in, and that's their payoff for it, is having that like inherently kind of higher income client base. But, you know, just something like that, I think, to kind of show that this is something we want to encourage before we require it, I think is probably important. Because I do, you know, I think like our landscaping ordinance is something that we did that way because it was something that we were at the point of needing to make it something that was in the code,
Mhm.
that we had requirements for, that we had guidelines and structure. For a million obvious reasons, you know, we're at that point with water and needing shade and needing like good vegetation so the town doesn't blow away in a storm, you know, so but I don't know that this is there yet, but I think if there is some sort of incentive to be had, something, I don't know, but
Well, I do like your pick from a list idea as far as large developments going in. When you're at the development stage where you're putting everything on paper and the shovel hasn't hit the dirt yet, it's very easy to kind
Yeah.
of weigh your options and go, okay, well, you know, I want to do out of this list of 10 sustainability things that I must do, I'll choose to be EV ready, or I'll choose to have, you know, 2 EV installations because I would love to attract that kind of person to my apartment building for
Yeah.
similar reasons.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just certainly don't want to force anyone to retrofit this in
yeah,
at any
Mhm.
point.
that seems like too much of an overreach.
And honestly, electrical work is expensive,
Really
and
expensive.
for a typical homeowner, that could be a significant expense that would
Yeah.
prevent them from pulling a building permit or otherwise, and I certainly don't want to do that.
If they can find an electrician.
I was about to say.
Yeah.
the
Yeah,
Delay, well, so our landscaping, exception that we processed last time, it's gonna be a lot of those same elements of, okay, we're gonna do it, but it's gonna, cost us a little bit more, maybe quite a bit more depending on the project, but also simple delay of both processing and also them acquiring a professional to accommodate whatever that is.
Yeah, it's huge.
So that,
Yeah.
thank you for making that note.
It's hard to get people to come out and do things.
My
Yeah.
office,
Oh, yeah.
my office literally has had the outlets going in and out for 3 weeks now, and someone has yet to be able to come.
I'm already going on 6 months right now.
There we go.
Alright.
I've been waiting 6 months for someone at my house.
yeah.
So, yeah, and electrical work is really expensive. One of my children just bought a hybrid and it plugs into a regular outlet overnight. He's only put gas in it a few times and he lives in Salt Lake. And so, I mean, where I think in the future, when you have more cars on the road that are hybrids or total electrical cars, I just don't see that great at the moment.
I do understand the safety component of it too, like we don't want extension cords running all
Running
over
everywhere.
parking lots, like, that's, that makes sense, you know, but
Yeah.
I don't think we're there yet. And so, and I think if we get to that point, that is actually a tangible incentive and a tangible reason, I think, for some sort of maybe more action on the city's part. It's like, we have like, you know, Home Depot power cords that people are running over in their parking lot
Right.
and they're fraying, and then it's sparked, you know, like that. It's sort of something you can easily point to and be like, and this is why we're doing something about it, not because we're afraid of that happening, you know, with this particular thing.
And to some degree, I just like, I don't know if you've seen that kind of thing, but I have not like gone to
Yeah.
a multifamily dwelling
Yeah.
and seen cords across the ground
Right.
quite
Yeah.
yet. And I just,
Mhm.
as much as like, you know, it makes sense to get started with this stuff, especially in a new build, I don't think we're there yet.
Mhm.
Okay.
Uh, Can I actually jump in? for
Yeah.
Just a few
Yeah,
little
Corey.
thoughts. And would you mind scrolling back to the slide showing differences between ready, capable?
Yeah,
Thank
here we
you,
go.
This one, yep. So for me, there's many questions going on here, but one of the biggest ones, I think we've already broken it out, is one is, are we ready for it? That's kind of more or less to summarize that. Is Moab, are we in this place? Does it make sense that, to make a small comment to that, is that what we are seeing is a bit of the chicken or the egg situation of, it is a deterrent for some types of growth because we need to start somewhere. And obviously the private sector is already doing its pieces. We're seeing that demand and already on their own. So that's usually what is the indicator, power cords through the parking lot. Certainly maybe a desperate indicator at that point.
Mhm.
But if we're starting to see the private sector already shifting that direction, I think that is one of the signs that the market trend, we could probably encourage that growth to a certain capacity. So that's the next question. Of the timing piece is one question, which is really kind of the feel of the community that is the commission's discussion. Where I want to focus a little bit more is just on the technical aspects of, okay, whenever we're ready, here's how I think it might work from a planning perspective and permitting perspective. I think Miles all of you made a number of points that I had already written down to bring up. But upon initial discussion, Alexi, myself, and Barry Ellison, we sat down and had a fairly complete conversation for over an hour, getting into the weeds of this. But through that, there was even a bit of a thought evolution as we were really starting to pull on the building side, pull on the planning side, and pulling on preparedness side, readiness. One thing that is kind of a contradictory first impression that we move beyond in that conversation is who should be doing this first. And one of our obvious and kind of first impressions, oh, well, commercial, large scale developments. So that's, when we're looking at this versus the homeowner, like we've seen with everything else. If we're not trying to place the burden on the community, there are other sources that should be installing that. We've seen that a lot in discussion lately. But when we actually are looking into the actual execution or use of these things, say a hardware store, you're not going to be plugging into a hardware store for long enough for it to be effective no matter what size charging you're doing. I mean, any charge is going to be some charging. But so when we're talking about residential, multi-house, and then commercial, it's kind of a one-dimensional look where I think you actually now flip that axis and you're looking at specific types of those things. So some residential might make sense. I think we've kind of begun to allude to that already. And then also some type of commercial makes sense. We didn't have super great consensus within our team about this, but one piece I brought up is public facilities, things that are for the public, often either generated by the public or through a nonprofit situation. That's usually where people are a library, something like that. They are there for usually decent lengths of time, most of the time. And it corresponds with, we're kind of putting ourselves in the game with this. City being included as a public facility. But then, single household residential, we're talking about time spent as another factor of thinking about it in those terms of a single household residence or any residential dwelling. That is the premier place to charge because you're going to be there for a majority of the 24-hour day, at least uninterrupted. And then you're going to be going to probably a variety of locations throughout the day. But ultimately, most people are charging at home. So now we're not talking about scale. I think just preparedness for that, or the readiness of capable at the very least, maybe does start to make its way into the discussion. I think we agreed a retrofit at any level would be a really tall order at this point. But the way the state organized some of this language in its raw code drafting, it kind of left that open. It's up to you what that means. I think for our purposes, the way our general provisions for legal non-conforming or not, the same way we did landscaping, it would be way too much. There'd be too many things kicking in. But again, with landscaping, we were very intentional saying, we need this sector, our residents, to change because they're the highest consumer. So if we put it off to anyone else or for longer periods of time, we're not actually moving that needle. So we intentionally said it has to go to us first. But with EV, it maybe isn't that way. So when we're looking at those pieces of residential, single household, obviously, I'm thinking onto the first or second tier are not that onerous for installation. And that's what we're talking to Barry about what that means and what Miles brought up, which is what Barry's main point is. We're not telling you how to use this outlet. It's just there and it's going to be capable at a far more reduced rate. So we actually put some numbers on paper. Yes, it's hard to get electricians, but if you're building a new home, they're already there. And that's Barry's point, is the economy of scale at that point. It's really quite minute to add that little breaker
I
point.
mean, the walls are open and you're not,
It's really quite, so I was actually kind of opposed to it, and Barry drew me into where that did make more sense. Going from even a capable straight to a ready, because the difference between capable and ready, maybe at that level for a single household, some just go to the ready because you're using it. First of all, you're actually getting some effectiveness out of it. But anyway, So we're there, but then with multi-household, it becomes kind of a quality question at that point. That's what was something we started to pull away, that I think the commission would have a good discussion about it, maybe not tonight. Because yes, power cords into the parking lot, that I'm pretty sure that's breaking a number of codes, for
Mhm.
one. But again, we're talking about, the deterrence that may be built into that environment that is too broad to overcome, especially now when we're talking multi-house about asphalts, those types of things. Again, I don't think going into a full installation package is the third package, maybe even for multi-household at this point, given that technology increases, that's something that I think Alexi is the expert and you guys will be the expert on. But I think some level of capability for that level makes sense, where, oh, now we do have some tenants that have these, or they're requesting them, and they can either pay in themselves to do that improvement, because it's not so onerous. They're tearing up concrete at this point. It's just running the actual wiring. So that's a thought, is, it's not just put on the managers. It says, no, you got an EV, but we're ready for you, but you're gonna have to pay for it just like you would a single family home. And I'm not sure, like with an EV ready with multi-household, the way that technology or propriety of some of those chargers might be, how that would work at that scale. But again, that's Alexi's.
Yeah, well, I would say if we have extension cords in the parking lot, we're already too late. We weren't ready. Which is why I kind of tend toward having conduit available. And then, right, maybe we're not actually ready to install anything. Maybe we don't have to spend the wire yet. And then as far as the actual chargers, depending on whether you want them to be networked or not, they can be relatively inexpensive. If you just want a dumb charger that'll plug into your car, not very expensive. But we're not even talking about that level of things in like single family homes, for example, because right, that outlet can be used for anything, not necessarily just a charger. So we're not necessarily assuming that you have an EV, but if somebody were to ever have one in the future, there would be that option. And then I think, as you kind of mentioned, specifically multifamily and single family, most people do charge at home. A lot of hotels, as you all pointed out, are already installing them. If you really want to charge, you go to one of those hotels. That's where you would stay. So I think those are some of the thoughts we had.
Yeah,
when we were
hotel is,
discussing.
we talked about public facilities. Hotels is another one. Obviously, we're not in a place where there's many of those coming in, especially on the new entitlements anyway. But that kind of, if we can get the commission to start thinking in those metrics, it was really an evolution of thought for me. I was fairly opposed broadly to a lot of this because of what we were immediately doing. When you look at this, is in putting cost onto the development right away. That's the first thing we do. But when you factor that in a real sense, there is a certain level where I believe it is worth digging into versus saying, hey, Moab's just not ready. I think we are. That's why there's EV chargers here. The question is, how ready are we, and for what? So I think that is maybe a little bit more of that deeper question we can start digging into. But ultimately, at the end of the day, as the commissioners, this is really one of the pinnacles of your job, is to be that representative for the community, to really look into your not direct constituency or an elected, but who this community is and represents, and are we capable right now to start doing that. But I think the main pieces that I think there's some agreement on is probably not on a major renovation, unless we define major renovation as basically you're starting over anyway. Maybe the use is the same, but you're scraping down to the dirt, and we could write that in. So retrofit becomes a totally new definition anyway. But new build, and then for what? New build and for what? And to what degree? For me is kind of where we're at. But I think the incentive piece that Kai brought up is really a big thing that the community is probably want to see, of what homework are we doing to try to get it done as within little cost to them as possible. But then also maybe that's a progressive step, which is this whole process. I might recommend that rather than saying we're not ready yet or we are ready, it is going to be a progression, and we'll be able to, like the rest of our codes, dark sky, very likely landscaping, is have that code evolve as we see the uses expand and change in the demand. But I think the incentive encouraging prior to requiring is a really interesting piece.
On the, go ahead.
No,
I was going to say, on the incentive front, there are some Rocky Mountain Power grants for commercial. There might be some for residential as well. So it is a nice time to be installing EV chargers right now, because there is grant money out there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think like helping, I know that was a big component when we were sort of first starting our dark skies stuff out. I remember like my mom got some new light fixtures reimbursed from and she was very excited about this and it was very easy to do, so things like that are available and we can help, facilitate that assistance for people. I'm really excited to do that, certainly. So, so yeah, like you said, because it's sort of on the cusp, there are those incentives, whereas they won't be when everybody wants one or needs one. So getting ahead of it might be really great for some folks to take advantage of. But yeah, I mean, if and when we ever do open things up to new hotel development again, I know that was, we're not under that instruction right now, but there were components of like what sustainability measures will be required for a building permit for that. And the idea of having that like menu of options and you have to combine them to meet this whole in some way. I think this is a really good one to have on there that like, frankly, probably most new commercial developments that are, again, trying to attract people, would happily be like, oh, I was going to do that anyway. Cool. I'm glad I get to check a box for something. So
Alexia, I'm wondering if you could talk about this, and we discussed it a little bit during
Yeah.
our discussion, was about and this was kind of moved over as a comment, is the city being the one installing and providing this. So what, or maybe why that isn't something the city is looking to get into the market of this. Does that make sense where I'm kind of teeing this question up?
Yeah. I mean, as far as the city providing it, I feel like it's a stopgap measure because there's a shortage right now at a commercial level for people to charge, which is why I get emails that are angry about people driving an EV here and then having to leave to charge, which hopefully Lions Park will help with. But even like last week, I got one because she was complaining Lions Park had level 3 chargers and she drives a Prius Prime maybe, and it only takes level 2 charge. And she's like, you have the wrong chargers there. Where am I going to charge? Ours is out in the construction. There's not one here. The Rocky Mountain Power one is out. So there are no public level 2s right now.
yeah.
There are hotel level 2s. That's not my primary concern. This person at Prius Prime is a hybrid. She can use her gas tank. But there is a shortage here. And I feel like the city providing charging is a stopgap measure between probably private industry coming in and filling in some of that gap with like fast chargers, Rocky Mountain Power, for example, and having it as it is right now. So we're trying to provide it because we have people who need it and they can't get access. I feel like as far as looking at EV readiness, a lot of it's because people charge at home and that's where they're going to be looking for it. And people have so much difficulty finding housing anyway, much less where you're going to plug in your EV. So you can add that to your list of things that make it hard to find housing. You're like, well, I have an EV and I have a dog. I can't find a house. And I think that's why we're talking about, can we make this something that's readiness? Because if it's even only new construction right now, that means everything existing doesn't necessarily have this. It would be entirely for the future.
Yeah, and with that, there were some new points there too, but was that, and part of the discussion, maybe this will jog our memory, is when we're talking about, well, the city isn't putting fuel services in the public right of way. That's
Yeah.
a private industry.
Yep.
And that is a really slippery slope here. But we talked about, well, when the first roads and highways were bridging the United States, I'm sure there were some bridges that was the benefit of the community to put a service station there run by them. But pretty soon, it makes more sense for the market to take over that long term, especially. So is that jogging kind of where?
Well, kind of. I mean, we do have an RFP out right now for the dispersed parking. So that would be public level 2s, and that would help with commercial, which is one of the discussions we had internally was, okay, so most people charge at home. That means that most people don't need a charger when they're at the hardware store, probably. And then we were thinking, well, if they do, and they happen to be next to public buildings, and dispersed parking area, things like that, then they would be able to use these shared level 2s. It wouldn't have to be every single business putting in a level 2. So that, I mean, that's related to
Yeah.
that evolution that we had when we were discussing it, is we were like, of the commercial things, things where people are staying overnight, which we're not gonna have any new of right now. Uh, it seemed like going back to where people are gonna be for a long enough time that they are gonna charge.
Out of curiosity, who pays for the electricity when somebody charges up from a public city-sponsored plug station?
Yeah, this has been controversial here because the city had those, that there were like 5 that were installed. The way it went is I think 2 of them were technically on our property and we were paying the electricity bills. Usually what would happen if you don't have a free charger, like you're charging people, is that you would put it in your rate structure. And this is just for reference, but like the RFP that we have out right now is asking for people to put out proposals to us, trying to explain how they could be low or no cost to the city, while still being market rate and less than necessarily charging at a, like a gas station, which is pretty standard. So it depends on how you want to set it up. If you charge for people to come, then typically they would pay through that rate for the electricity, which is what would be happening at Ryan's Park right now. But the way the city previously had it set up, it was more or less an incentive to try to get people to drive EVs, to make it easier to do that while you were here because of our greenhouse gas goals. It was established before I was here, but that's my understanding.
I think it's important to meet our greenhouse gas goals, but at some point, like, those of us with a normal internal combustion engine don't, it's not like we can pull up to a city gas pump and fill our tank from on the taxpayers' dime. So as we go forward with this, like, I like the idea of incentivizing the market and like things like a hotel wanting to put in EVs chargers because, that brings a certain clientele there that they may be interested in having. That's fantastic. But I do think at some point it is worth noting, at least in my mind, that currently there's in my opinion, a significant price barrier to owning an EV. That they are not the most affordable vehicles on the market by any means, and that generally someone who can afford a Tesla can afford to have that plug put in their garage. And I, like, to your point of like, I have a dog and I have an EV, how do I find a house here in town? I feel like currently I don't know many people in the community who are in that position, who have a, fairly expensive vehicle, period, and are struggling to find housing. And so while being prepared for that in the future, I understand, because at some point the price point on these EVs should start coming down and they should become more accessible to more people. I think like currently most people who can purchase one of those can, get that installed in their own home. And so what I think about most with any of this readiness is if the city wants to essentially attract people with EVs to spend time in the city. I understand the idea of like putting in, and in my opinion, they'd be like a pay pump kind of thing. I'm assuming there's somewhere where you can swipe a credit card and then charge your vehicle kind of thing. That they would put those in like downtown, so to speak, so that somebody would like stop off and grab a cup of coffee at a local business or something like that while their vehicle charged. That would make sense to me because you're promoting the local businesses. If people need to spend an hour and a half to let their car charge up as they're passing through, then having something that, one, the expense of the actual electricity is falling on the person driving the vehicle, and 2, that it's encouraging them to stop somewhere. Lions Park is a beautiful place, but it's fairly far from any local businesses. I would love to see the places that people are stopping to charge their vehicle being nearby to places that they might frequent. And, I would love to see somebody stop into a bookstore or a coffee shop while they were waiting for their EV to charge, because we had facilitated that. But I also don't want to pay for other people's gas, so to speak, or
For
electricity.
sure. And I know that was a discussion with city council when they were looking at the Rocky Mountain Power charging stations, and that obviously was a point. I think that was made roundly by everybody on council, was like, if it's in town, they're gonna do town stuff while they wait. But I think that was the spot, that Rocky Mountain wanted. So that's what it
Sure,
did.
and at
But
the time that was that development going on anyways made
yep,
sense.
exactly. But no, absolutely. I mean, that is 100%. Yeah, you're they
Yeah.
will get out and walk around town and go into businesses and spend money. And so that's a good thing.
Mhm.
So, yeah, I appreciate starting this discussion, you know, Lexi, it's really great to sort of think about that. And now we all have that in our minds about like, yeah, it is a lot more money to try to do this after the fact. And it's something that, you know, we should be considering and certainly encouraging development to account for this, if it's not in any way. And, you know, others, I'd be really curious to see kind of what we can come up with and where it's gonna go. I mean, this is not the last time we'll have this conversation, I'm sure. But yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Next, just future agenda items. We site plans? Someday?
Of course, and I'm sorry, I'm such a broken record.
Oh, it's okay.
But yeah, we have many new resubmittals, many applications going through DRT right now. Some major level 2 housing site plans, as well as some minor subdivisions and other petitions for lot plat amendments. But nothing on deck immediately coming that we're prepping final materials for right now.
All
So,
right.
moment, stand by as usual.
And bye,
When it comes, it's going to come in a big old flood, as things do.
as it does. Yeah.
That's okay.
Other news outside of future agendas is the planning department has made an offer of which has been accepted for the community development administrative assistant. So we'll be selecting a start date and hopefully getting a new face in here to
Cool.
carry some of all these fun things that we're doing.
That's awesome.
Awesome.
All right. That's it. Thanks all for attending. Thank you guys for your presentations. And I will adjourn the meeting at 7:06.